Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Mind, Your Reality, Your Results, a weekly show where I speak with an expert on the subject of mindset so you can change your mindset and ultimately get the amazing results you want in your life. If we haven't met before, my name's Leah Fink. I'm the owner and founder of All Thrive, and I help protect people from the pain of damaged relationships. So if you ever want to chat about that, I would love to connect. But I am very excited today to be welcoming Matthew to the show. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Leah. Very excited to be here with you today.
Awesome. Well, we will jump right in and definitely take advantage of Matthew's expertise here. I certainly encourage you, if you have any questions that come up or any comments you want to make, please put those in the chat so we can answer them and you can take advantage of Matthew's brilliance. Also, if you're watching the show and we're not live anymore, please feel free to put those in still because we can still get back to you and make sure you get that answered. So without further ado, do you want to tell us a little bit how you got into the world of finance and debt?
Absolutely. So my story is not different than actually a lot of others that get into the financial world. Most people actually come from a different background or a different career, different walk of life, and the same was true for me. I was actually loved helping people. I always was a lifeguard and teaching swimming lessons, and so it seemed like a natural progression. I wanted to study to become a paramedic. So I began my training, completed the first level of training called the EMR, the Emergency Medical Responder, and started to work on different oil rig sites and pipelines way up in northern Alberta. Well, I realized pretty quick that that was not really what I wanted to do with my life. I've always knew I wanted to be able to help people. I really wanted to be able to make an impact in people's lives. And it just felt like that wasn't really the area where I was going to be able to make an impact. And so at the young age of 21, I was very, very fortunate to be introduced to the financial world. I'm very grateful that I was through a family friend of ours and haven't looked back since. So I was 21, almost 22 at the time, started out part time, got all my licenses in place, and just have been learning and evolving and growing ever since. And I'm an avid, learner, reader. So that was way back in 2007. So I'm coming up on my 14th, almost 15 years in the financial world. So really excited to spend some time here with you today and hopefully help give people some hope about debt and maybe remove some of the stigma around debt.
Totally. Thanks for joining us. I noticed Robert's joined us saying, awesome topic. I fully agree. This is, like you said, so important for helping people and not a single person problem. I know a lot of people probably feel alone in their debt or like they've failed. Do you want to start by talking a little bit about that mindset and how people maybe don't need to take that on or how we can destigmatize that a bit?
Absolutely. I think that's really the best and the first place to start is, unfortunately, in this day and age, debt is something that affects just about every single one of us in one way or another. Now, most everybody would at least have some form of debt, maybe even if it's just a mortgage. It is still debt. Some would often argue that it's a form of good debt, but it is still a debt. But beyond that, the stats show us that many, many Canadians actually are having more consumer debt and more and more and more debt. So the last stat I had heard from Stat Canada, and this possibly is outdated now, but for every $1 that each Canadian earns, we owe on average about $1.77. So they're saying that the debt rate is about 177%. So pretty scary situation out there. That does include, right, car loans, credit cards, lines of credit, mortgages, so all debt. Still not a good situation though. And so when we earning a dollar, owing $1.77, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that we're going backwards pretty quick. So that's the first thing I really wanted to talk about today, Leah, is that a lot of people may be sitting at home, maybe watching this from home or maybe from their office, or maybe watching it after late at night after you get the kids to bed and they're maybe stressing, looking at all the bills that they have to pay on the table. And I just want you to know that you're not alone, right? This is a situation that is affecting just about every single Canadian. And so what we are trying to accomplish today is get a little bit more awareness out there. Have some open conversations about it. If it is something that you're suffering from, please have a conversation with somebody. Don't suffer in silence. There is help, there is resources out there, depending on the severity of your situation. Hopefully, that gives somebody a little bit of help and a little bit of hope.
No, I think it's so valuable what you're saying, and especially this concept. I think one of the reasons maybe that a lot of people do feel so bad about debt is because, ideally as we work, we think we should be getting raises and hopefully even matching inflation, let alone hopefully a little bit more than that. And when they keep thinking, oh, I'll have this money soon, or, now that I have this thing, I should be able to pay down the debt. But of course, the debt's accumulative, and a lot of it makes it harder to pay off the more you have. And,
Yes.
like Robert's saying too, debt affects everything: self-value, self-confidence. I think especially for parents and families, if someone's a breadwinner, this sense of I didn't help my loved ones it's a
Mhm.
huge burden. So I just love that you're saying that.
It absolutely is, and great comment, Robert. You are 100% correct. Unfortunately, it affects really every area of your life, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, like your relationships. So many have probably heard the stat, but the number one reason, unfortunately, why most marriages have been ending, and the debt or the divorce rate is around 50% right now, unfortunately, here in Canada. The number one reason is due to money issues. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say most times it's not because there's too much of it. So it's important that we are talking about this here today.
Yeah. So with that all said, it can feel like a heavy, daunting topic for sure, but glad people are here and listening. Do you want to just dive right into a couple things people can do right off the bat? You said, first of all, talk to someone. Don't take this on alone and expect that you're going to be an expert. What else would you suggest for people?
Absolutely. So, a couple of things I would suggest. First and foremost, I think most people need to figure out what their credit score is. Majority of Canadians don't have a clue what it is. Some know that they can order a free report directly from Equifax or from TransUnion, from one of the credit bureaus, and that is true. The downside is majority of Canadians aren't going to take the time to do it. Why? Because you have to print off a form and fill it out and you have to mail it to them. So it's a bit of an onerous process just to figure out what your credit score is. So what we'll do, Leah, is we'll actually put a couple resources within the chat of this video. There's two in particular that I really like. Is we'll provide you a link to a website called Borrowell and a link to a website called Credit Karma. These are two free services, both in Canada. Credit Karma is also in the US. So if we have any US viewers tuning in here today, both completely free. You just fill in your information and then you can get your credit score within minutes. And the nice thing is once you do that, is they'll actually keep you up to date. They'll send you like a monthly report saying, your credit score increased this month. Good job. Or, we saw your credit score decrease this month. Click to here. Let's see what happened. So it gives you a finger on the pulse, if you will. So it gives us a good baseline, a good starting point, I think, to know what our credit score is. And so that's always where I recommend most people start.
Well, that's
After that,
yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Leah.
I was just gonna say that what a great resource. That was really gonna be it. Is you need to start with where the heck am I to know where you're gonna go.
Absolutely. And so that brings us to our second point is now that we know that, our second most important step is we need to know where we're at financially. So you can call it, financial checkup, a financial snapshot, whatever it is you want to call it. Essentially, what it is we need to know on one side of the paper, okay, here's everything that we own, all of our assets. Here on the, let's say, the right side of the paper is everything that we owe, all of our debts or our liabilities. Our assets and our liabilities, that difference will give us what our approximate net worth is. Now, I do caution you, many of us and many Canadians may have, unfortunately, a negative net worth. If we have more debt owing, or maybe a family doesn't own a home, but they have a number of credit cards, line of credit debts, then they're likely going to have a negative net worth. And I know that can be scary, that could be daunting, but it's at least now we know where we're at. And so now that we know where we're at, we can start to move to where we want to go. So my first piece of advice is if you do have a negative net worth, then what is our first goal? Well, we got to get that negative back to zero, back to even, back to square one, to a fresh start. Then we can continue to build that positive net worth from there. And so I do have a number of resources, just some simple Excel files that I use that I still use to this day. That's just a one pager, talks about you input your assets, you input your liabilities, it automatically calculates your net worth for you. So if anybody would like that, I would be very happy to provide that to anybody that asks. I know Leah will put my information in the chat. So simple resource that at least can give you a snapshot of where you're at now today.
And I do really appreciate, my experience with you over the last, I guess it's been quite a few months now that we've known each other. I really appreciate that you're so willing to support people with resources. Like you said in your story, this is about helping people. I am gonna to pull us off track maybe for a second, because I think when we're talking about this stigma, like Robert says, this personality behavior belief that people have, there is another factor. And you talked about, for example, people that don't own homes or are in this negative piece. There's a socioeconomic part of people who've maybe come from poor backgrounds, have not had this education before. Do you think there's a point when people can't get help, or is it everyone can start, everyone's able to do this, they just need to start looking at it and find those resources?
Yeah, good question, Leah. And I'll be blunt. My answer is I truly believe that everybody can. I will say this, though, unfortunately, I don't think everybody will be willing, maybe
Mm.
because it does take a little bit of effort, right? It does take a little bit of discipline. So people that have got themselves into a debt situation, that didn't just happen overnight, right? It was that gradual behavior that led them down that path. So the exact same is true. It's going to take that gradual positive behavior in the other direction to get us back out of that situation. But the biggest challenge I find is that nobody really has gotten taught financial education, right? I certainly didn't learn about it in school. I'm sure you
Oh,
didn't either, Leah. And it's just something that's not in our curriculums. I wish it was, because financial is something that affects every single one of us. As I said earlier, debt is something that affects every single one of us in some form or fashion. So I really want to, release that stigma and really focus on the education. So that's why I try to provide, as many resources as possible. And I just truly think that if you do good things and you put that good stuff out, then it will come back to you tenfold.
yeah. And answering that question too about how do you get comfortable and face your reality without the negative self-talk, to me what you're saying is that piece, like validating. It's, there's outside circumstances. I'm sure a lot of people with COVID over the past couple of years might be in a different place with debt than they were, say, 2 years ago.
Hmm.
um, Understanding that there is education and such you can get for it, being able to validate that you are taking steps forward. Like you said, maybe not everyone's feeling ready to do this, to make some of those commitments and change their mindset really about how they handle money. But if
Right.
they are at that point, if they are ready, it will happen. There are things they can do, not a personal failure. So thanks for letting me take that little diversion. But I know you have tons of tricks and stuff. You talked especially about one that I thought was a really good mindset version of paying off debt, that the snowball versus the avalanche. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. And before we dive into that, I did want to add one thing
Please.
to your comment there is yes, absolutely. You know, I just say be kind to yourself. Right? Be good to yourself. We've all made mistakes. We've all done things that we weren't proud of. But that doesn't necessarily define you. Just like your debt doesn't define you. That's not who you are. It's maybe the situation that you've gotten into, but that's not you. I'll give you another example. It's I would say a sense of hope, but unfortunately, it's not necessarily a sense of hope. But to give you an idea, we'll put this resource in the chat as well. If you just Google Canada's debt clock, you'll actually see the rolling amount for the national federal debt level. And the sad reality is for each and every Canadian citizen, so Leah, your share, my share, currently is about $30,861 owing. That would be our portion of that $1 trillion+ deficit or debt. So even the Canadian government is in debt. So when I said it affects every single person and everyone, I wasn't joking. So first thing first is just be kind to yourself and make sure and start to have those conversations that support the direction you want to go into and go towards rather than the opposite way, the negative way.
And I think talking to, when you mentioned that, and something I've heard from before from economists and such, is that piece of not all national debt is bad debt. And the same thing with our debt, right? If you were in debt because you went to university for the degree that is going to support you throughout your life, if you got a mortgage as a way of long-term investment and to support your family, those are all to an extent good debts. So hopefully they're not fully scaring you off, but are still important, obviously, to be addressing, to be working on.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And yes, those could be viewed as forms of good debt because there is, in a sense, good debt and bad debt. And what we're really more focusing on today is the bad debt. We're talking about consumer debt, right? On high interest credit cards, store credit cards, car loans, lines of credit. So that unsecured debt, that's where I really find it starts to create a lot of issues for people. And like Robert said earlier, is that's where it really starts to, I think, leak into people's psyche and really affect their mood and their relationships and maybe their work and really everything around them. And so I think that's a perfect lead in is let's talk about a couple of simple examples, like you said. So the two most common examples of how somebody could tackle their own debt if they wanted to, or if they think, or if they're confident that they're in a position where it is manageable, it is obtainable. Maybe they are paying more than the minimum payments on a monthly basis. They are chunking away at their unsecured debt on a monthly basis. Now, if it's at a point where it's not manageable, where you're going further and further and further in debt each month, and you're not even able to make all the minimum payments, let's say, on some or all of your cards, that's when I think it's really important that you seek out a professional and start to have some of those conversations. And like I said, I'd be happy to have a conversation or welcome a conversation with anybody that's in that situation. Obviously, everything we discuss would remain completely confidential. So let's talk about the first group, though. So the two popular methods you've probably heard is the first is called the Avalanche. The second is called the Snowball. So let's talk about each. So the Avalanche method would follow conventional wisdom, is you would want to tackle the debt you have that has the highest interest rate. So let's just give this a very, very simple example. Let's say we had three different debts. Let's say we had one on a store credit card, let's say to the Bay, and we owed $5,000 on that card. And then let's say we had a Visa card or a MasterCard, and we owed $10,000 on that one. And that was at a typical 19.99%. And then let's say we had one more where we owed another 10,000, like on a line of credit. And let's say, fortunately, that was at a lower interest rate, maybe around 9 or 10%. So the Avalanche method would say we would want to tackle that debt with the highest interest rate first, which would be that store credit card, the Bay credit card in this example. So those credit cards are typically in the 28, 29% interest rate. So that makes sense when you logically think about it, is we are paying the highest amount of interest on that. So we want to get rid of that credit card as quick as possible. So that's method one, is we would put a minimum payment on our line of credit and a minimum payment only on our Visa in this example, and focus all of our extra payments, everything we can, all of our attention towards tackling that high interest store credit card. Hopefully that makes sense, Leah.
Totally.
And then so as soon as that 28, 29% high interest, let's say the Bay in this example credit card, that 5,000 is paid off. Now what we want to do, we would tackle that Visa, because that would be the next highest interest rate. So now we'd have that extra payment because we've now paid off that store one. We would tackle everything on the Visa. And then as soon as that Visa is paid off, finally we would tackle that line of credit at the lowest interest rate. That in its simplest form is the Avalanche. Now, a couple of keys, it doesn't matter which method we do, is first thing first, if we want to get out of debt, well, guess what we need to stop creating? More debt. I know, novel concept. So that's one of the things that that people I find struggle with the most, is they're paying off those cards, servicing maybe the minimum balances, but then they're just continuing to use those cards.
Yeah.
So that's when they can really get themselves into trouble. And that can start compounding, unfortunately, against them negatively. So now here, let's talk about the other method. That was the Avalanche. Let's talk about the Snowball Method. And so now the Snowball Method is, we would tackle the credit card with the lowest balance first. So let's talk about that same example. Remember, we owed about 5,000 on our high interest Bay store credit card. We owed $10,000 on our Visa at 19.9%. And then we owed only 10,000 as well on that line of credit at 9 or 10%. So we would tackle one of those two. So let's just say the Visa in this instance. So now we would put the minimum payment on the store credit card, the minimum payment on that line of credit, and we would tackle that Visa aggressively as fast as we can. All of the payments we can, any extra payments on that Visa. So now what happens is, when we get that Visa paid off, or when we get that smaller balance paid off, what I want people to do is celebrate, right? Woo, we did it, right? Have a little celebration. You got to reward yourself along the way. I will caution you though, please, just something small, just a little celebration. Maybe have, just an ice cream with your hubby or with your kids, or something simple, right? Or whatever is important to you. But please don't have an extravagant weekend away and rack up that debt that we just worked so hard to pay off. But it's very important that we celebrate those little wins along the way. And so now that we've celebrated that little win, getting that first smallest debt paid off, it feels good, right? And as human beings, we're very emotional creatures. So by us getting that little win, it kind of rejuvenates ourselves and reinvigorates our determination to continue to get that next debt paid down. So now, same thing, is we would take all of the payments that we were doing on that Visa and tackle that next smallest balance. So not the high interest rate. So I just realized with the numbers I used in the first example, it wasn't the best, but you understand the idea. So if I was to say it a different way, is, let's say we owed 5,000 on the store credit card for our Snowball, 10,000 on the Visa, and only 2,000 on the line of credit. We would tackle that line of credit first because it's the smallest balance. It would be the fastest way for us to get a win financially. Does that make sense, Leah?
That makes a lot of sense. And from my perspective, working on more of the mindset and helping people with that, I really love that. I think one of the challenges, of course, with debt for a lot of people is there's habits, there's mindsets, there's obviously the vulnerability and self-judgment around money, but so much of it is, in this case, I think debt just feels heavier and heavier. And so you have one debt and you're like, okay, that's okay. I'll keep working on it. Then suddenly you have two. And it's like, oh, well, now I have two. Oh, now I have three. Like, and I think that weight mentally is got to be so much heavier. So actually, I really like that idea of maybe it feels unconventional or not how you would assume is the best strategy, but the best strategy is one that's going to work for someone, the one that's going to get them to the next step so they don't get disheartened and fall into a much worse space.
Absolutely. And I couldn't have said that better myself. And so my preferred method and what I often will recommend to my clients is that snowball effect, because I've worked with so many clients over the last decade, almost decade and a half. And like I said, we're emotional creatures, and it's so much about a mindset, and it is a challenge, right? And I find that too many people, especially when it comes to debt, are leading and living quiet lives of desperation, right? Most people don't know this, but your average Canadian is anywhere from 1 to 2 paychecks away, from losing their home, from losing everything they have. Like it is a scary situation out there. So again, I just want to reiterate, you're not alone. And Leah is right. You need to find what method works for you. And if you were to Google Avalanche versus Snowball debt methods, you'll find endless articles arguing for or against one way or the other. But like she said, is you have to find what works for you. And I think the most important thing is that you work with, your advisor or whoever it is you're dealing with, and find a plan that works for you. And then most importantly is stick to it.
Yep.
Right? Make a commitment to yourself to stick to it.
I want to add one more point here. I know we're kind of getting near the end, but Darlene had mentioned something about investments can potentially leave you in debt if you don't have the right investors. I think that's really important to say. And in the bigger picture here, for people maybe who haven't been educated or are really hesitant to trust someone around money, because obviously there's a huge amount of trust to meet someone and say, what should I do with this? I don't have the knowledge. You're trying to make these investments that are smart, but you might get in a bad place with it. And I know some people especially get very hesitant of banks, or they think they're going to have to pay a lot, or that they have to have a lot of money to be given good advice. Do you have any suggestions for, I mean, obviously, aside from reaching out to you, because you are fantastic at this, and I know,
Thank you.
you're working to help people, but when people are looking for that support, what can they watch out for or be looking for?
Yeah, good point, Leah. And so my advice is always this when it comes to anything financial. So not just, let's say, with your insurance or your, debt management, your investments, but even with, let's say, your mortgage, your home and auto. I always encourage people, speak to an independent broker. And so why I say that is, as Canadians, we have a lot of trust, maybe some misplaced trust for the big banks, because there is one on every single corner. But unfortunately, the big banks are just a business, and those big banks are in the business of making money for their shareholders, not really teaching us and educating us financially. So I'll give you an example. As let's say you deal with, the big green bank. Everybody knows who I'm talking about. And let's say you want to get a mortgage or an investment. What is the chances that big green bank is going to offer you a mortgage or an investment from the big blue bank or the big red bank? Zero, right? No chance. Why would they? It's not in their best interest. So now the value of dealing with an independent broker is they have partnerships with many different companies, sometimes 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 plus different companies. And their whole job is to shop the market for you, help take time to work with you, educate you. So I picture it as if you're sitting on the same side of the table with your broker or your advisor, and now you two are a united team working together to find the best solution for you, versus just walking into your bank on the corner and you're only getting the option they can offer you, which is theirs. Now that may or may not be the best, but you'll never know. So my advice would be, if you're shopping around for home and auto insurance, please talk to a broker. If you're shopping around for a mortgage, talk to a broker. If you're worried about your debt, like we're talking about here today, investments, insurance of any form, please talk to a broker.
I love that and really appreciate that. Not to say we're anti-bank or anything, because we're not trying to insult anyone, but the idea that, different people are going to have different agendas and we'll be able to help you in different ways. And I'm totally with you on this front. If you want to talk to a couple different people too and get an idea, who do you go to? If you go to your bank and they give you a 5-minute spiel and tell you exactly what to do and don't give you really much information, versus if you go to a broker, they're explaining why they would do this and how, it's not you have to instantly commit. So thank you so much for that. Did you have any resources that you want to share that we haven't had a chance to mention yet?
I did, yes. I do have one other resource I think will be really quite valuable. It's, again, just a simple Excel style sheet. But what this is, it's like a credit repair calculator slash debt reduction calculator. So similar to the net worth, all you would do is just input your numbers into there, and it will actually do a simple comparison for you. Here's what the snowball method would look like. Here's what the avalanche method would look like. Here's how many years it would take you paying this amount of payments to get debt free. So I think it's just a valuable resource. It helps people, again, know where are we at? Where's our financial snapshot right now today? And so again, I'd be happy to provide that. It's just a free resource. Feel free to reach out to myself or Leah, and she'd be happy to provide that for you.
Yeah, I certainly hugely recommend, if anyone wants to reach out to Matthew, ask him questions. He has amazing resources that you can use. And yeah, just thank you so much for being here today. That was fantastic. And, even I think I do kind of well financially with keeping my affairs in order. But when I, even listening to this, I'm like, oh, there's a couple things I could definitely be looking at a bit differently and doing differently. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome, Leah. And so, what I would say to that is, I think this is a perfect way to end it off is why not, again, talk to a broker and just get a free second opinion. Doesn't cost you anything but a few minutes of your time. And if you are in fact doing well, then they'll be the first to say, you're doing a great job. Keep doing what you're doing. But if there is maybe any areas where they could offer a suggestion, then they're going to do so.
That is a great point to finish on. If you're worried about the investment it takes to talk to people, it's not. Talk to them. It's free. Get your consultation for sure and get that support. So thank you for being here. Thanks, Robert and Darlene, for joining us in our chat here, and we'll see everyone next week.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Take care.